All right, let's get started. Marshall, is that the notepad?
Oh, wait.
The whiteboard. So what we're going to do is we're going to start into a new topic today. We're just going to talk about a little bit of basic programming concepts. Then we're going to do it more on HTML, XML. So this is this three topic is going to help you to set it up for the next set of the quality assurance or topics and the tools that we're going to talk about. So typically when we look into the SDLC cycle, right, the development team, once they finish the design aspect, they're going to go into the implementation aspect. That's when they're going to write the code. You as a quality assurance person don't have to worry about too much of the code. However, there are certain basics that you need to know it. So when you start doing it, any sort of automated testing, the tools will generate the scripts, but you need to get a little bit understanding of how that structure is set up. So what we're going to talk about it is a very basic programming concepts. Now, and online, can everybody hear us?
Yes.
Yes.
Turn that on.
Can you guys hear us online?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
All right. So let's talk about just the basic programming concept. So what we're going to talk about, it's essentially, if somebody gives you a piece of code, what are you going to think about it? So when you think about any program, okay, it's going to have three basic components into it. Okay, so if you think about this as a program, it will have a start and end blocks or some sort of indication which says, hey, here is where the program starting is, here is the program is ending it. Then it will have a, what I call is temporary storage area. And then it will have an execution instructions. Okay. So think about if you're using a calculator. When you're trying to do some sort of advanced calculation, right? Then often you will do certain piece of it and you will put that into the memory. And then you will continue to do the other piece, recall from the memory and add it, right? So if you have multiple addition compounded with the multiplication and division, if you want to do it, that's the way you do it, right? So every time you're trying to put anything into, hey, I'm going to put it in temporary in the memory on my calculator, that's nothing but a temporary storage. Okay, so that's, you can use it just during the execution of this block only. Okay, so this temporary storage is valid only within the scope of this particular thing. Okay, so let's take a look at it, how this basic structure maps to actual real programs. And doesn't matter which programming language you go, what programming code you look into it, this is going to be always the basic structure, irrespective of which advanced or lower level programming language you do it. Okay. So here's an example. Okay. So if you look at it, there are two different languages examples show this. T is a transact SQL, which is more like a database manipulation language that's been used. In Java and C# is a lot of times known as a fourth generation or 4GL language. Okay. So in this case, each one, if you look into it, right, there is a begin and end. So that's your block. It says that, hey, program starts here, program ends here. Above that, they have this thing, which is essentially naming it what it's going to be called. So the block below it, it's called as a hello world procedure. All it just says that, hey, either create a new one, or if there is one already existed, replace that one with this one that is going to follow. Okay. And then they have a begin and end, which says that here is where my execution instruction starts. So if you recall it, right? So I have a begin and end. In between, I'm going to have temporary storage and execution. Now, temporary storage is an optional thing. If I don't need it, I'm never going to use it. So in this case, I don't need it, so I don't have that. And the only thing which I have execution is hello world. So this is a piece of program, or you can say it's a block of software that will get executed somewhere when somebody invokes it. Same way, if you look into the Java language, it's the same thing. Hello world is essentially identifying, hey, this class, because everything in a 4GL language is an object-oriented manner. So just this is the class, this is the template that's going to be used. It's called hello world. In case of Java, the opening braces and the closing braces, curly braces, are usually represents the begin and end. Okay. So within that class, there is a method called main, and that method starts here, ends here. Sorry, I should have matched it. This is the one which is in this segment, there's two pairs. Okay, so there's a sub block within the block. That's what it is. But the same thing, hello world, there's this. This is the execution instruction, and I don't need any temporary storage. Okay. So here is the second piece of code with the temporary storage variables. Okay. So it's the same thing when you look at it, right? There is a begin, there is an end. Okay. There are two temporary storages, one called integer, and they name temporary storage as age. Second one is 1 character long, and that is when it's set as middle initial. Okay, so this too is my temporary storage. Okay. And then the begin and end essentially encapsulates the instructions which I want to use the program to follow. In this case, there are multiple instructions. So that's why you say one after another one. Right. So all it's doing is first setting that temporary variable that I've created, age, to 21, setting the middle initial to something. And then it's printing that, hey, I am, and this is how you integrate the variables into the statement. And it's going to be different depending on the language, right? I think it's important for you to understand the concept, not necessarily just the syntax of the language. Okay. And then you just print those things. Exact same thing in a C++. So these two are your temporary storage, the integer and string, and that's for our execution statement. Now, just notice that depending on a language, sometimes you may have temporary storage definition happening above the block, still within the program confines, and in some cases, it will be inside that block. Okay. Any questions on the basic structure? Right. Then there's some additional things you're going to see it as a quality assurance when you look into either the program or some sort of a generated scripts. It is the operators. So you're always going to have, whenever you're doing a compute, you're going to have some things that you will compare it or value it or do some sort of computation, right? So when you do it in a simple mathematical calculator, right? 2 + 2, where plus is an operator. Okay. Same thing, there are a whole bunch of operators. Now there is a special kind of operators in a programming language. It's known as a Boolean operators. By default, Boolean operator will always have either value true or a false. So if you think about, if I'm writing a program and I need to evaluate certain condition, one of the requirements we had it was password has to be 8 characters and it has to have 1 uppercase and 1 special symbol, right? So I may just write something like it's, hey, check me first, is it 8 characters? And check me if it's an uppercase. And check me if there is a special character, right? So I have 3 conditions that I'm coming together. But then I want to also just say it's, if all 3 of them are true, then only do something, right? So I need some sort of operators to work through, right? And when I get that final results, if all 3 of them are true, then I want to proceed it, right? So that's, you can do it in a Boolean condition. You can just say, hey, if condition 1 and condition 2 and condition 3, if all 3 of them are true, then set that password is true. Right? So that's where this operator Boolean comes into play, because it evaluates only true or false. Okay. And underneath that, when you look into it, there are 3 conditions that it validates it, and, or not. So we just talked about and condition, right? The other thing we can validate is or condition. If condition 1 is true or condition 2 is true, then do certain things. Okay. As long as one of them is true, I want to perform the task. And the third one will be the not, which will be the absence of certain things. So you can just say, hey, if password is not true, then I want to perform error message. I want to display the error message. Okay. So those are the kind of things that helps it. They're a little bit different depending on the language, and you can just see it like it's, this is pure mathematical equation. If I'm running mathematical equations, there are still those 3 Boolean operators, but this is how they get represented. Then you see it SQL and C# and the Visual Basic, all 3 different languages. As you can see it, they are essentially like it's kind of represent differently, but it's there. Then you have a comparison operators. Remember what I said, is it equal to 8 characters or less than 8 characters or more than 8 characters, right? Same way, like it's all of you are like it's familiar with the mathematical equation, right? Whether something is equal, greater than, less than, greater than, equal to, less than, equal to, or if it's not equal to. Right? Those are the operators, people use it. So if I go back into mine here, right? I'm setting it up this equal to this. So this is an assignment operator. Right? If I have to do equality, then I'll have to do this. Not equal, it'll be this, and so on. Good so far with the operators and assignment? There's a basic thing similar to what you do it in math, but just in a programming language. Then the other segment that we looked at it is the execution instructions, right? So this particular block. Now that block can have various different types of statements. And there are 3 basic statements that you need to do it. One is a sequential statement. The other one will be a conditional statement. And the final one will be iterative statements. Okay, let's look at each one of them. So sequential statement is what we saw it already, right? Here. everything gets sequenced. So this will always be the first, this will be third, this will be fourth, and so on. So when the program gets executed, the statement 1 gets executed first, then statement 2, then statement 3, and then statement 4. It will always be done in that order. Then that's a sequential, because I'm not looking for any different variations. I want to do all those things in that particular order. Versus sometimes you may have to do a decision statement. Remember what we said, if the password meets condition, then do this, else do this, right? That's a condition you're setting it up. So this is an example of conditional statement. Right? So if you look into if, do this, else do this. So within your block, we have, if you look into it, right, this four are the piece of execution statement. It validates it. If your department value is 5, then print that, else print the second statement. So in this case, if I'm kind of executing a program, it will check the value of department, and based on that, it will execute only one of the two statements. It will either do this or it will do this, but it will never do both. Compared to the sequential where everything will get executed, here, the only certain thing will get condition as long as those condition matches. Okay, and it's the same way you can see it in a C++, if then else. Okay. So often you will see a program that says conditional statement, and based on whether the certain values on your temporary storage is executed, it'll identify what set of the segments it need to execute. Then there is an iterative. Okay, so you have to do certain things over and over again. Right? And when you try to do certain things over and over again, right, again, you can fall into two conditions. One is I know exactly how many times I need to do that. And sometimes I don't know how many times I need to do that. But I need to do it till certain conditions are met. Okay, so for example, right, if you look into login scenario, right, where it prompts you for user ID and a password, certain websites will keep asking you forever till you enter the valid user ID and a password. Some website will just say, I'm going to give you 3 attempts. And after that, I'm going to lock you, right? So if you look at it, right, I'm iterative in both the scenario. In one scenario, I'm going to indefinite till the certain condition becomes true. And in the second scenario, I'm going to do it only 3 times. And as soon as you hit that 3rd time, I'm not going to execute it anymore. That I'm going to just get you a locked or a message or something. Okay, so those are like it's done through a for loop and a while loop. If I know exactly how many times, then I'll use a for loop. If I don't know how many times, but it'll be based on certain conditions, then I'll use the while loop. Okay, so here are example of for loop and while loop. This both are exactly doing exact same thing, but you can see it how they're doing differently. Okay, so in this case, the for loop, it says, hey, I'm going to start with a counter of 1. So I is a counter. It says that I'm going to start with value 1. I'm going to keep executing this loop till that value is less than or equal to 10. And then after every iteration, I'm going to increment the counter by 1. Okay, and here is the sets of statement that I want to use it over and over again for that iteration. Now you may have multiple statements within that block. Okay. So here it will print 10 times hello world. Okay. Same thing with the while loop. Starting condition I equal to 1. And I'm checking it while I is less than or equal to 10. I'm going to keep doing this. Okay. I'm going to print the hello world. And I'm incrementing the counter by 1 here. Sometimes this counter could be an external variable that may be influencing it. Okay, but if I change here, if I take it off this thing, this loop will run forever. Because if you look at it, the value of I will always be 1. That means it's always less than or equal to 10. It'll keep doing this forever. Or if I just do it, I equal to I plus 5, then we'll just do it twice and get it out. Right? So it depends on how I set the value of I. Versus this one, it's telling you a counter. Sometimes you can change that counter by few that, but it's always definitive because I know exactly how many times I'll do it. Okay, so here you can use an example. While the user provides a password which has an 8 characters, uppercase and lowercase, keep prompting them for the password. Right. I'll keep saying, trying to create this user, you're not having the valid password. Please recreate it, recreate it. Okay. Any questions? This is, in a nutshell, the basic of programming. So whenever you look at the program, it'll be always structured for these 4 things. Okay.
Explain one more time. The for loop.
So the for loop is exact the number of times. I exactly know before, just by looking at code, I'll know exactly how many times it's going to be executed. Right. Here it says I equal to 1, which will be my initial condition. I'm going to keep doing it till I is less than or equal to 10. And every time I do that, within my count loop, my counter is always going to increment by 1. That's what I'm setting it up in a condition. Okay. And then it'll execute this many times. Every time it goes in, it will automatically use this counter increment. Second time it does it, it increments that counter. And think of this, it says I equal to I plus 1. So whatever the value of I was there before, it'll add 1 to it. So every time loop gets executed, the value of I, which is my counter, gets updated. Okay, so when it executes 10th time, at that point, I will become 10. Right. And then the 11th time, it'll go. It says, hey, this condition no longer meets. It's going to drop out of it. We can stop the execution.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any questions on this thing? Okay, let's talk about the second topic. We're going to talk about is HTML. Okay. It'll talk about what's known as a hypertext markup language. Okay, we'll talk about that. So, majority of times when you're going to work in your quality assurance now, it's going to be your web applications. Okay. So you want to understand how the web applications are constructed, how everything works together. So think about you going to a website. Let's use an example, cnn.com. Right? So if I'm going to go to cnn.com, this is going to be my browser, right? Because you're sitting at your desk, you're using in your laptop or your device or your phone, whatever that is, and you're just trying to say, hey, I want to go to this site. Okay. What happens is, behind the scene, there is somewhere there's somewhere some server which is taking all those requests from CNN.com, coming everywhere, and then providing information on it, right? So this will be a server, a physical server, okay? What happens is behind the scene, when this request goes to internet, right, it identifies which server it maps to it. It's known through what is known as IP addresses, okay? So somewhere on the internet, every time you connect it for anything from anywhere, first thing there is a router lookups happen. So the moment you do CNN.com, there are a whole bunch of DNS routers located across the world, across the internet, which essentially your request goes to one of the closest router. They look at it, what is CNN.com, and converts that into what is known as an IP address, which is nothing but a big lookup table. It says that CNN is located at this address. This is located at this address. Okay, and the other addresses are IP addresses, where it kind of resolves it. So it finds that IP address of that CNN.com from this cloud and says, okay, this request needs to go to this machine. Okay, every server has essentially known as IP address and a MAC addresses. Okay. You will always have only one MAC address per server, and you can have multiple IP addresses per server. Okay. Within that server, they may be running an application inside something known as a web server container. So this is a physical server. The outside boundary is a physical server. Inside is a web server. Okay. So all that web server does is listens into the request coming from web, and then they will make a determination where that request needs to be routed. Okay. Within the web server, you may have multiple applications. Okay. You have more than one application. It could be CNN.com, it could be SportsIllustrated.com, whatever that is. Then every application, but it's known as a web application. Right? So this red is a web application. Every application that you think of it is going to form multiple pages. So when you go to CNN.com, right, CNN has multiple areas. Right? They have a business, they have health, they have travel, they have sports, right? So each one of them will have a different pages, right? So you're going to have multiple pages inside it. Okay. Each page is going to contain certain sets of information. Depending on what you're requesting it, it will take that page and send you back here, which then that information gets displayed in your browser. Okay, good so far? Now, within this sets of pages, there is always one special page known as home page. Okay, so per application, there will be only one home page. One and only one home page. And that home page is, if I don't specify subsection or additional details in my URL, it will always bring that home page and displays it. Okay, so I'll show you an example since we talked about the CNN, right? So if I do it CNN.com. So notice that I didn't specify anything, just went to CNN.com. It still brought it up a specific page. Okay. If I do it business. Now I'm saying not only get CNN, get me specific thing in it. It's going to get me into the business page. Okay. So if you look into this here, right? There was a specific page, home page. Whenever I don't specify any categories in this, it just does it. But I can always specify additional information in that URL, and it will navigate me to whatever maps to that. Now, if I specify something which was not there, let's say, if I just say my business, then it just gives me an error message that, hey, I couldn't map whatever you're requesting it to a specific page. Okay. And all that mapping is done by this web application. It says, hey, if this is the URL, I'm going to break it down into multiple segments, and I'm going to determine what matches it. And if I don't find any matching, I'm going to give you an error message that gets into it. Okay. So think about it. We talked about a few concepts here. Your browser, the physical server is the big container. Underneath that, I may have one or more web servers, which is a logical container. Within that, I will have my application containers. And those application container contains the pages. Okay. Same thing, think of it, right? When we talk about rflow, the default page is always login, right? If you just do it rflow.com or whatever the URL is, and the moment you do that, it'll get to the login page. But once I log in, it allows me to go to different places, right? And if you look at the URL at the top, it indicates that, oh, I'm now in this segment, or I'm in this segment, and so on. Okay, that's essentially nothing but a structure of what is known as a web application. Okay. Now, each one of these components, right, that we talked about, the pages, how are they formed? Like they are formed into what is known as in hypertext markup language. Just think of this, right? All the information is getting sent. That has to be understood by your browser. And your browser will display different things. So if I go to CNN.com, right? If you look into it, right, there are multiple things getting displayed here. There are images, there are links, right? There are text. All those things get said. There's some sort of menu bar at the top, right? When I look at it, right, there is a different things. If I do US, then there is a menu, right? So all those things are essentially what's known as a rich text information. It embeds a whole bunch of other things other than just plain text. That is formed in what is known as an HTML, hypertext markup language. So that's what the content is being sent to the browser. And then browser looks at that and interprets it appropriately and then displays it into your window. Okay. So we're going to look into what is this format for this page. This is HTML, it's written, that gets displayed. Okay. That's what this HTML is all about. It's hypertext markup language. It's something for your browser to understand it. So it's not for a human to understand it. But humans are kind of forming it. So you need to know the structure. When you look at your web page during testing, you will be able to see it and says, why this page doesn't look like correct. You can always look at HTML behind it and says, oh, this and this doesn't look right. That's why it's a problem. So talked about the web server, website, which is application, the web pages, and the home page. Okay. Now, you always have to think about it whenever you're building an application, how you're going to organize the information. Okay. So you have to first understand about your application, kind of information that you want to utilize in that application and then show it. So for example, we just talked about CNN.com, which is nothing but more informational, right? All I'm just doing is I'm pushing the information to the people and they're just looking through it reading it and consuming it. Versus if I'm doing an e-commerce site, now my profile is going to be different for an application, right? I'm not only pushing the information about the products, but I'm also interacting it and getting the information about the orders, processing the orders, creating a personalization, and then I'm allowing them to, like, it's going to log in and look through it, their order. I want to keep it that segregated from one customer to another customer, right? So you need to first understand what kind of information you want your websites to present. Then based on that, you build it what is known as an information architecture, which talks about what are the goals, how I'm going to lay out the information. And then based on that, you come up with the structure of your pages. So when you look at things like in CNN, okay, they say, hey, I want to, like, it's guide the customers with whatever the latest news. But then I also want to give them ability to go into, if they are interested in business, I'll give them a page catered to the business news. If they are interested in travel, I'll give a page catered to travel. If they are interested in sports, I'll give a page catered to that. Now, within that sports, they can say, hey, I want to subcategorize. Are they doing NBA, NFL, college football? What are all they trying to do? You can then subdivide that into the multiple sections. So that's how you build the structure first of the, how you want to lay out the information and then do that. Same way, if you look into the design structure or design document for the R flow, right? They laid out the structure and says, here's how I'm going to organize the information. I'm going to have a login, and there's going to be sets of pages for super user. There's going to be set of pages for the dealer. So it's going to be set of pages for the lender. The dealer can do this functionality. So here are the 3 pages for that. Lender can do only this too. So there are 2 pages for that. That's how you build the structure, and then you build the pages around it. Okay. So let's talk at a briefly. Each page, so now when you build it, it's nothing but a markup language. Okay. It is telling browser what to do it, and the way it marks those things is through a series of tags. Okay. So when you look at HTML pages, it's nothing but a series of tags with an information embedded into it. So what are the tags? Okay. In case of HTML, tags are anything that is kind of represented inside the curly braces, not curly, I'm sorry, angular braces. Okay. So when you look at it, here is examples of 2 tags. Okay. Whenever somebody says that, hey, stat, do this, what it tells the browser is that, hey, here is your markup. And this markup tells you that everything that follows this, you need to bold it. Okay. These are predefined tags in HTML. Right? As you use more HTML, you will know which tag is representing what. Right? But the B stands for bold. And then you can also say it's, hey, italicize whatever you're coming it back. No. So those are like its tags. Now, the way it does it is there's always a starting tag, and there is always an ending tag. So if you are not putting a / inside your Angular brackets, it indicates that that's a starting tag. It will do that action for whatever follows it till it encounters what is known as ending tag. Okay. So anything in between these 2 tags will be bolded. Okay. All it tells you is that if you think about switch, right? This is turn on switch, and this is turn off switch, right? So this, everything you start doing that way, you stop doing that way. So when a browser looks at it, right? So if you look into it, all the headings are bolded. It just tells it, hey, bold these things till you encounter a end tag. Now, there are certain exceptions to this rule, and they're mainly sets around the paragraph and the list. Okay, so whenever I want to start a new paragraph, then I'll use the paragraph thing. BR stands for a break, the line break. right? So whenever you're typing it, you don't want things to be forever long, right? You want to look it nicely so that you will hit a carriage return. Well, how does machine know when you hit the enter? Right? And the way it does it is by providing a tag called break. Okay. Li is a list item. When I'm creating a list, that's what this is. Okay. Now, another thing you can do it in nesting of tags, sometimes also known as embedded tag. So there are, when you're writing certain things, you can say, hey, I want to bold this items, but within that, this small particular item, I want to essentially italize it, or I want to change the font color for this things because I want that thing to come out visibly to anybody looking at that page. Okay, you can do those things through known as a nesting. Okay, there are certain rules you need to follow when you're doing an HTML nesting. Okay, it's known as LIFO. Think of it. What stands for is last in, first out. Okay. So think of it, if I'm doing a nesting, it'll be doing like this. Okay, it cannot overlap it. So in other words, you cannot start a tag, okay, start another tag, end the first tag, and then end second tag. You cannot do that. That's not allowed. Okay, so just remember this LIFO is whichever tag you put it last has to end it first, and so on in case of HTML. The other thing is that there is no case sensitivity, right? So if I do it something like a page with P as capital versus lowercase page, and HTML treats them both as the exact same time. Okay. Certain tags will have attributes, and we'll see it in a moment. Okay. The key thing is that some browsers does not support some attributes in some tags. So have you encountered ever an issue that, hey, you go into certain browser and the page looks perfect, but if you end up using a different browser, the page looks completely odd. That's mainly because they're using the tags that is supported in the first browser, which is no longer supported in the second browser. So a browser doesn't know how to interpret that. So everything is kind of coming its off. Okay. So let's write a page in HTML. Okay. So what I'm going to do is so all I'm going to do is I'm going to write a simple HTML page. I'm a little lazy, so I'm going to cut and paste the information from here, and I'll walk you through what it is. Okay. So this is a simple HTML page. I can see it. Can everybody read it now? Okay. So all I'm just saying is that, hey, this page is a HTML page. So I start with HTML. Now, HTML page is kind of always broken down into two parts. One is known as a header, other one is known as a body. Okay. Header is the part of the page which contains all of the metadata information. When I say metadata information, it's the information that doesn't get displayed within your page, browser page window. Okay. It is all the information I needed in order to perform the proper definition of that page. And the body page is going to contain the content that's going to be displayed inside the page. Okay, so you will see every HTML page is going to have a header and it's going to have a body. Okay, I'm keeping this fairly simple, right? And says, you know what, my metadata for this page is I want to display the title as hello. Okay, and in my body, all I want to do it is display just that this is my first HTML page. That's all I want to do. Very simple. There's no advanced, no graphics, nothing, no images, no links or anything, just the text. Okay, so I kind of write it in whatever the notepad or the tools that I want to use it. Then do it as a save as. Okay, this is important, but I want you to follow the instructions. I'm going to go ahead and do that. First thing you need to do is change this type to all files. Okay. I'm going to call it my first page. Okay. Then you need to put the extension .html. Okay. Because by default, if you save anything into Notepad, it saves as a text file. Okay. Whenever you save certain things as text file, browser doesn't interpret it anything. It thinks it's only text file. The browser needs to always look for an extension, either .htm or .html. This is, oh, now I know how to interpret this markup language. Okay, so I'm going to save that. Okay, so if you go look into here, now look at this. The symbol associated with it is my browser, because that's what I said, every HTML page I want to see in my browser. And the type is HTML document. Okay. If I have just simply saved it as a text file, it'll show me as a text file only. Okay, so it's important for you to save it that. Now that this is my page, let's see it if it works or not in the browser, right? So there are two ways you can do it, right? You can just go to wherever you save that page and double click it, right? It'll show up in the browser. Here's the couple of things I want you to notice, right? Did you notice this? In the title, it's a hello, right? In the content is this, and this tells me the location from where the page is pulled it out. Okay. If you're pulling it out from internet, it'll be HTTPS because that's the protocol it uses. In this case, it's just using the file protocol. That's what you're using. It says I'm pulling it up from local file versus I'm pulling it from internet. Okay. So now let's experiment a little bit with these things. Okay. So when you look into it, right, if I want to change this to hello world, okay, and if I just do a save, and here's a way that I can refresh the page. That means it's going to reload the file. Notice it changed to hello world. Okay, so that's how you change the metadata. Now let's look at this thing. Okay, we say that I want to like it make some part is bold, right? Turn off switch. I'm sorry, turn on switch. Keep doing that till you hit the turn off switch. Okay, I'm going to save this. I hit it. Do you notice it? This part get bolded. This didn't get it. See it happen? What happens if I do this? Is it going to allow me now? Okay. It's Notice that it still didn't do anything. Part of the problem is some of the browser does not enforce all the HTML. The Chrome browser is just more lenient. All it does it is, hey, in those scenarios, I'm just going to do that. So while it is a required, not enforced by all the browser. If I do the same thing into other browser, it will give me an error message saying, hey, you cannot do this. There are certain rules. Okay. So what I want all of you to do it is open up your laptop and then build your first Hello World page. So you need to get comfortable with building this. Okay. So when you look into the next two pages in your note, there is an instruction of exactly what I did. It is how to do the HTML document using Notepad. Okay. And if you're using MacBook, just use any text editor. You can still do the same thing. Okay, good. So I'll give everybody 10 minutes, including online, to go ahead and build your Hello World page. Experiment with it, just like what I stated. Play around with it, see what you learn it. Okay. And I'll leave this instruction up for you guys to see it. Page working?
Yes.
Okay, I see it. No, you don't need to send it. Just see it if it's working for you or not.
Yes, it is
Okay.
working.
It's good. Now, if you look into this, and sometimes this is the trick that will work in most browsers. If you right click on it, you get an option of view page source. Okay. If you're like looking at HTML file and says it doesn't look right, and you want to see what actually the HTML is used to generate that page, just say view page source, and I'll tell you what the HTML is generated. Okay, right there in the browser. So that's another way when you think your thing is not working properly, and then you want to see what's going on. This is the way you can do it. Okay, so you just go, whatever the page is, you right click on it and say view page source. Okay, I'll bring up that.
Does it work from all the web pages or from the one?
Whatever the page is displayed in the browser is what you will be able to see it. Unless the browser has turned on the security that doesn't allow you to view source. There are certain times when pages are secure pages, they will instruct browser not to allow that to view the source page.
It's good with pretty much any page.
Yeah.
Like CNN or.
Yeah, we can just go look at this, right? This is the CNN. If I go look at that view page source, look at that. You can see the whole page source.
So is it read only or can we modify?
You cannot modify it. You can think of this way, right? The CNN page source, it's getting pulled it from the CNN's website that you do not have access to edit it. Even if you do any changes, there is no way you can change anything yet. It's a read only. You have to save it somewhere, create a local file, and then you can see the changes. But the goal here is not to edit the pages. The goal is if something doesn't look right, you can view the page source right there to see, hey, what could be wrong. Right, so I think here's one of the example, and I'll try to replicate what she was trying to do it, right? So if I misspell, let's say if I do this, okay, my title is never changed. So if I go and see this page, see nothing showed up here. And it says, what's going on? I can just say view page source. Now I can clearly see that there's a problem here. So it's not that there was nothing showing it. It was not displaying properly because there was a mistake in the HTML page. So as a tester, you can look into some of those things. Hey, why this page doesn't look like? Well, I can see this error, and then you can just let the developer know that, hey, you're not generating HTML page properly. Okay. Any questions before we move forward? Are you guys good with the HTML?
Can you show the error one more time, please?
Which error?
You put 2 T's or 3 T's.
Yeah, so look at if you look into my HTML, right? My title tag is starting, but since this did not match what I started, it never finished it. So it thinks everything is title. Okay, because of that, nothing is getting displayed. See here, everything is showed up in title. Okay, and then if I want to see it, still gives me the whole thing in the source so that I can see what's going wrong.
So if I put 3 T's everywhere, then it would have changed
Well, it'll still give me an error because
spelling.
yes, HTML tags are predefined. I cannot change it. Here, I'm trying to change it. It says you did not follow the rules of HTML page. Okay. So that's the basics of HTML page. Now, most of the times when you look into it, your pages are not just the simple pages, right? It has images. It has, if I'm trying to do a login, it'll ask me to provide the information, right? So it's not displayed there. So how do I do forms in HTML? How do I do it kind of interaction work within HTML? So that's done through some additional tags. Okay, so we already talked about this structure, right? There's a head and then there's a body. Okay, things that you put into the head, it's a metadata. It contains the information about the document, not necessarily the document. Then the tags in the body, essentially it's the content of the page that's going to allow you to see through those. And there are different markups you can do it. Things like if I want to display certain things in the center, I can do it. I want a different heading sizes, I can do that. There is a tons of that, and I'll show you in a moment a website where you can go and learn and experiment yourself. Okay, but then it also has the data entry. Remember I said, what if I want to enter some information? So it has a input tag that you can use it to get the different types of data. So you can have either text type, checkbox type. You can also do a drop-down list. You can do a button. And all these controls are known as objects. Okay. And this object is going to be useful when we start talking about doing some automated testing and generating the scripts. All those things takes a significance. Okay. So let me show you another page. Okay. So here's the page that I've created, right, with some data entry that I can do it, right? A drop down and a checkbox and a submit type of things. So if I want to look at the code for this one, here's how it looks like. Everybody able to read through it now? So a header, right? The head. Now inside body, right? I put these things and then I entered a break. This one itself. So remember, like I just said, hello world. That's what's getting displayed here. Then I entered a line break, so there is a space in between. You see it here? Then I created a form. And that form essentially tells me, go to IntelliX, and there is a link that I put it. So href talks, go to separate link. That's what it did. See? So I started with enter name text. After that, I put the link. So I go to IntelliX. Then I put a text type. So I can just say, I want to go and I want to put this text here. Okay. Then I said, hey, I'm going to allow you to select the city. And then these are the three options. And this thing is fairly common. You're going to see it problematic. So let's say you are like it's testing certain things and selecting certain value from dropdown. And you said always, no matter what value you selected, it always shows up as for certain things, right? You can quickly go into HTML page and says, what are they doing there, right? It's a fairly common mistake. Like we all developers like to do cut and paste a lot more. What I call it CPV programming, right? So here they just kind of just cut and paste and say, you know what, for Columbus, set the value as Columbus. For Dayton, set the value of Columbus. They forgot to change this to Dayton. So whenever you select this or this, it was always set as Columbus. Okay. Then here's the checkbox. And by default, I'm setting the value as active. Okay. And then there is a submit button that you can do it. Okay. And here's the other one, right? So it just says, hey, I'm trying to do some sort of image, but it's not able to find that image. So if you look at this, right, it gave me an error that, hey, you're trying to display something, but I couldn't interpret what it was. Good. Do you understand how the data control does it? Okay. So you should be playing around with it. To just good. I'll show you a site. Okay. So this is it. We talked about, showed you how you can put the images. There's a relative path name. You can put the links. Okay. And then again, we talked about what to do. Now there is a site. I want you guys to be aware of it. Called w3schools.com. Okay. If you go to sites, write it down. Okay. And then say, hey, I want to learn the HTML. Okay. It's a very nice site that essentially allows you to get all of the HTML basics, all of the tags, how you can create forms, you can add a graphics, and you can just go ahead and learn it itself in here. Try myself, right? You can do those options. Okay. So you can try it out, these things here, right here, right? You can just do that and you can click run, see how it changed. So they have a nice tutorials that allows you to mess with it. You can see how things are working. When you do change certain things, how things just changes it and so on. Okay. And it goes you at a length for it. So there's no point in like it's us trying to like teach you exact same thing in the class when you can do it everything yourself. Okay. You can take even a quiz to see it's whether you're able to learn it more or not. And this is all extensive work. Or you can do an audio, video, and HTML. Or you can do colors. You can put it the different browser support specific things. What are global attributes and so on. Okay. So I highly recommend when you get some time, keep playing around with this site, learn it HTML, because that's the key thing that you will be doing it whenever you're doing a web page is working with HTML. The more you get comfortable with HTML, the easier we'll get it. Also, when we do an automation testing, you're going to see a whole bunch of HTML, and then you need to understand what things you want to grab it to automate it. Okay.
So this is the web testing field.
So again,
Web testing, is it web testing?
so it's not necessarily a web testing that you're doing. You're just learning HTML here, which will be useful whenever we'll be doing a web testing.
Yeah.
Right. So whenever things doesn't look normal, and you're trying to figure out why this thing is, you can do that. And you're gonna ask you, hey, can you send me the source code that you're running into it? Right. So that's when you just go ahead and just right click on it and just says view source. Okay. And then this page source essentially gives you everything that you need. You can then copy and paste and send it. Here is the code. Any questions on HTML before we move on to the next topic?
Yes. Hello. Hello.
I don't think he can hear you.
Yes, I think my thing is glitching.
Yeah, I think his screen is glitching. Yeah, freezing.
Yeah.
We cannot hear anything. Also, I think he's telling something.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes,
Yes,
we
I
can.
can hear you.
Yes.
It looks like when I lost the connection, it just reset the whole thing. Okay, so what I was talking about, the question in the room was asked it is this a language or different language? This is not a language, this is an output that is generated that is getting sent to the browser for display. You can have a different languages like C#, Java, that the developer uses to generate this code. Now, some pieces will be your static pieces, right? So that doesn't change, that will be a static HTML. But there's a lot of data that gets generated dynamically from the database. For example, if I'm logging as a lender, all of the IDs that are associated with me, I pull it from the database and then I get displayed in the web application. So you're going to have a C# or C++ or a Java code that pulls the data from the database, converts that into HTML text, and then sends it. Okay, does that answer your question? Does it answer your question? What do you do it? Okay. But again, I think it's, as a developer, you don't, you have to worry about both of that, right? Because of how it's going to get generated. As a tester, all you care is what is the output getting generated that is sent, and is it looks right or not? If not, you flag it and says, this is what it generated. It's a developer's responsibility to figure it out what's getting generated wrong. Right? And they should not be expecting you to say, hey, tell me why it's generating wrong. Because that's their code. It's at the unit test level that they have to deal with it. Okay. So that's about the HTML.
Dilip, I have a question. I was asking you earlier, but because of that the system glitching. So the table and that other slide, what is that TR and TD you put in between the header and body?
Where
The go back. Yes, here in the view source page.
okay, so you're looking at here in this one.
Yes,
So
but
you-
you were enter the name and user city, that
Oh.
slide. You were showing us the whole how to form a table. That's a page.
Give me a second.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, this one.
Okay. you
So
were
what
saying,
is that TD and TR?
oh, this is the table row, table data. So if you
Okay.
think about it, right, when you use Excel, Excel has rows and Excel has columns and a
Yes.
cells. That's what this is. I'm forming the table. Each table has a row. Within the row, there are multiple data cells. That's all this is.
Oh, okay. So with that website you gave us, the W3 schools one,
Yep.
so we
Schools.
can get different kinds of tags and what do they call? Can we get it from there?
Yeah, that's all it is, right? So if you
Okay.
look at form size, a form, right? So if you go to,
It's HTML tables.
right, so if you go to, so if you go into there are a whole bunch of things inside it. So there are forms that you can use it. There are tables and tag list, right? So if you do that, there will be a whole bunch of things inside it, or how the forms are generated. And then you can just use the elements, tables, everything in there.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
So I would just say play around with that and I'll tell you those things.
Okay. Thank you.
So think of it as HTML. It's everything is predefined, right? All the tags are predefined. You're just putting the text. So all you can do it is using predefined tags. You can just go ahead and create a page that will be displayed appropriately. But there is also a concept of known as an XML. Okay. So XML stands for extensible markup language. So HTML, everything was predefined. You cannot change anything. You try to see it, right? When I misspell the title, how it worked, right? XML is essentially a language that allows you to define your own tags and your own markup things. Okay. The key thing is that the XML is used to exchange the data between the systems. So hypertext is essentially used to just display things in the browser. So I gave all of you an example of Amazon, right? You're trying to purchase things through Amazon. One of the things that when you hit the payment, you're going to go to external, right? To some sort of payment gateway. And you're going to provide some pieces of data, my name, my credit card, my essentially CVV code, expiry date, and the amount that I want to charge to it, right? So think about it, this is all data. So now when I send this information over to payment gateway, how do I make sure when I say it is the amount that is not interchangeable with the CVV, right? So I need to make sure if I send you in this order, you receive it in that order only. But then what field is meant for what value? I don't know, right? So XML is a language that is kind of used to say, you know what, I'm going to generate an XML document, I'm going to send that document to you. So each element in that document is going to tell you what the purpose of that particular field is and what is the value. Okay, so that you can go ahead and process that. So when I send you this piece of information, you interpret exactly the same way. Okay, so XML is primarily used for defining the documents and sending the documents. Okay, so here's the comparison between the two essentially markup languages. Okay, the key difference is XML, you can define your own markups, which is an extensible set of tags. In HTML, there are predefined tags. Another important thing is how the data is kind of used. In HTML, it's used mainly for presentation only. XML is a content, what exactly it contains, what's the data values. Okay. As you saw in HTML, there is not a lot of validation, right? You can just define title, you can put whatever you want to throw it into. XML, you can enforce certain standardization around the data infrastructure. Say that, hey, if I'm trying to say, I'm going to send it to the payment gateway, then I must provide a credit card information. I must provide the billing address. I must provide this thing. So you can put those rules into it and says, you know what, those things are not optional for you. When you send it, that needs to be. In HTML, everything just gets it displayed in the browser. In XML, you can run that XML through the various presentation logic and you display it in a different way. You can it's going to show it into a tool, or you can show it in the browser, or you can just it's going to show it in what known as XSDs, which is the XML structured data documents. So it can be presented in different forms. Okay. So how do I kind of create the XML elements? More or less concept is same as your HTML text. Okay. So it has a start tag and an end tag and all the data in between. Then you define your own. So for example, here, let's say if I'm capturing all the movie information, right? So you can say movie has a director. So I'll create my own tag called director. Right? And I can put a value in between those things. Okay. I can have another element with the same value, right? A lot of times the director is also an actor in the movie. If I want to let's call it that, I can do that too. Now these two are two different pieces of information because the tags are different. Okay. Other key thing is they are case sensitive. In HTML, your tags were not case sensitive. So you can put it like it's right. So I could do simply something like this. It'll still match it. Say, hey, this thing and this things are same. In XML, they are two different things. So in other words, if you it's type a city in 3 different ways, all caps, camel case, or a lowercase, they all three are different tags. So case sensitivity really matters in XML. Okay. Another aspect, since it's defined an extensible tags, you can change the starting and end date. And here's the only way you can change it, right? So if I don't have any data between the start tag and end tag, then I can just go ahead and abbreviate like this. Okay, so this thing with an empty tag of merit, the start tag, no data, end tag, you can abbreviate as the same tag, just that if you put a slash at the end, it just interprets that the start and end is same and there's no data in that element. Okay, this becomes useful when you're writing a big document with certain pieces of information that is an optional. Then you essentially save that data because everything gets transmitted over the network, right? So the more effective your transmission is, the more faster your process is going to be. And in this case, since there's no data, there's no value in sending that entire big text. Okay. So you can also set a name value pair as an attribute within the tag. So here's an example, right? You have a city and a zip code associated with that city. So you can put the zip code as an attribute for that particular tag. Okay. It's up to you, right? Sometimes you can say, hey, it's not necessarily that attribute because that city can have multiple zip codes. In those, or a zip code can have multiple cities in it. In those cases, you want to have a different attribute. I'm sorry, different tags. But if there's a one-to-one relationship, then you can always use an attribute aspect of it. Okay. They're provided to put the additional information, right? So for example, if I'm kind of putting a book, right? All book has a unique ISBN number. And there's a one-to-one association, right? So I can always put ISBN number along with the title as an attribute. Okay. Now the nesting aspect, right? So here's an example you can do. Okay, so book has an ISBN, which is an attribute at the element level. But then I can have a title, author. Same rule, last in, first out for the nesting. Cannot crisscross. Okay. You can nest it, right? So in this case, I have a collection of books. Within that, there is a one book. That book has a title and author elements into it. Okay. Here is another example. Okay, it's a collection of books, and this is kind of represented visually on the right-hand side, right? Here is my collection, right, which is my books. Okay. Then each book has an ID. So that's what my 1, 2, 3, and 5, 5, 5. Okay. Then each book has author, title, and year. For the second book, all I have is author and title. I don't have information about published, which is fine, right? In this case. So you don't have to have all the data elements, right? In this case, I have not enforced the rule that it has to have published year also in that. So in this case, this is fine. Okay. Yes.
Why do you show this REF?
Oh, you can refer this book to there. Sometimes you can just say, hey, this book and this book are related. You can always put a reference. Okay, you can ignore this for now because the data is not put into that. Okay. Okay. So here are some of the rules for an XML, right? We talked about everything has to be an end tag. They have to be cleanly nested which is the last in, first out. Okay. If I'm putting anything as an attribute, so for example, if I put it here, 1, 2, 3, those thing has to be in the quotes. Okay. And then each document must have a unique first element called the root node. In this case, the books is a root node. So the root node, whatever it is, cannot repeat more than once into that document. Okay. So I cannot say, it's, hey, this is books. I'm going to create another root element called DVDs. Another one, you cannot do it in a single document. What you can do it is you can create a library node as a single root node. Underneath that, you can put books, videos, CDs, you can put those kind of things. But if you're trying to define a root node, there has to be only one and only one. Okay. Let me show you guys an example, an XML document. Here's an example. Okay, same one that you started, like it's in there. So this is my root node book, right? Here's each one of the book inside it. Okay, it's identifying what is the title, who is the author, and in some cases it's defined the year. Now, another important thing is for it to be known as an XML document, there are two things needs to happen. The extension needs to go as whatever the name of the file, .xml. So for HTML, it was .html. For this one, it's .xml. And second thing, it has to have this initial tag, which identifies any parser that this is the document containing XML. And that version 1.0, it's essentially a specification version. Now, a lot of documents has gone to version 1.1 and version 1.2. Okay, but this one document was written with version 1.0. So it tries to apply all the rules that were applicable to version 1.0. So whenever any parser looks at this document and says, hey, I need to parse this XML document, what rules I'm going to apply? I'm going to apply the version 1.0 rules. Okay. Here's the other interesting thing. You can do it, right? So if I open with a browser, this is what happens. Okay. So you can pull the XML files into the browser and you can collapse things and view it. So this is your root node, the books, and it contains it. Okay, then it essentially allows you to expand each of the nodes to see what the content is, right? And it will give you a message that, hey, there's no style because we didn't specify any style to be displayed for XML. So all it just does it just shows it as a document tree. Okay. Now remember what we said, the XML is more stringent than HTML, right? In HTML, I swap the header and a body and still displayed it, right? It still gave me the content, but not necessarily the way I wanted. What happens if I do this thing? Let's say if I mess it up and I don't specify the end title. Okay, I just save it and I come back here and to do that through an error. It says, hey, you know what? I couldn't build a document tree. Here's the problem. This is error in line 7 at column 9, opening and ending tag mismatch. Okay, It tries to look at this, all the information just came out garbage because it couldn't represent that. So I usually will go into the line 7, column 9, right? So it'll just say, if I look into this, this is my lines. Okay. Interesting, it didn't give me the, right? So you can even see a view source, and it gives me, and it says it's line 7, column 9. So it says that it's in the first element, there is a problem. You need to look into it, what is the problem? So you look into that element, and says, where does it start, where does it end? And you go start figuring it out and says, hey, you know what, this element is not formed properly, what it is, right? So you can just go ahead and fix this. And I will go back, refresh it, you will be able to see it. Okay, same thing will happen if I kind of, well, let's say I do this one. It will give me error on this line now. See, line 17, column 11. So when I look at this source, it is line 17. Right, it says this element is a problematic now. Because it was expecting somewhere to finish the author before doing anything else. Any questions on XML?
XML is almost like HTML. So what's the difference?
So 2 key things, right? One is HTML, it's mainly for displaying the content. And I cannot define my own text. XML, I can define my own text. And I can put some additional validation and rules on it.
And where it runs? HTML runs in browser.
HTML runs from a browser. XML, it's essentially, it's the document data elements that I'll send it across the systems. And it could be from my company system to another company system. It's talked about in Amazon case, right? The payment gateway, I could do it. Or I could send it between the systems within my company. Or I can use that as a configuration and says, hey, when I'm starting up this application, here is the data that needs to be loaded. So XML user, and pretty soon we will look into what is known as a web services. So web services essentially, think of it as a service. So when you look at the service-oriented architecture, I want to call the services, whether they are within my company or across the company. Well, what is the definition? What are the operations I can perform on that service? All of that data is done through XML. So XML provides you a structure to contain the element information, which HTML cannot provide it, right? But HTML is very rich in text display, right? So when I go to the CNN site, I don't want it to look like this, right? I don't want this blend like that. I want some sort of presentation. So I can actually pass this data to some sort of presentation, and it will still look nice and neat like this, right? Because this is much more user appealing. If I just do it CNN, right? This is much more appealing to your end users. Just taking that. Right, it's much more organized. It's easy to navigate, easy to understand the information. So that was the purpose of HTML versus XML. Yes.
Are we calling XML an HTML page? Like we are relating them?
So browser understands more only HTML, right? It's just that like the browser also have capability to read the XML and just build the document tree so that you can decipher and read it. Because it's still some sort of a markup language, right? So if you're running a browser that does not support an XML markup language, then you will not be able to do this, what I've done it here. Chrome does that.
From HTML page, whatever I'm going to enter as data, is it like going to be stored in an XML kind of thing?
No, HTML is generated a lot of times dynamically, and it's also stored as an HTML files or HTML files. Think about it's two different things.
Right?
Both are markup language. So start with a markup language, right? One's purpose is to display things properly. Other's purpose is to make sure the information is exchanged properly, right? So when I'm like trying to send you a credit card information, I don't know if you're sending me the card number first or expiry date first, or you're sending it me the amount first, right? So if you specify that this is the number, this is the amount, then it's much more easier, right? I can interpret exact same way as what we are talking about. So that's when XML is used, because now I can define my own tag. I can say, hey, this is a card number, or this is the author. This is the name, billing address, right? Which I don't have that flexibility in HTML. I can't do it because it's all of them is markup and display language. So that's the key difference. So don't confuse that, hey, one has to be contained within the other. No, there are two different languages. The purpose is used for different. Now, as a programmer, I can use the data in the XML to generate an HTML that will get displayed on the page. Okay, but it doesn't have to be. I can still use XML just purely to send the information back and forth between the services. Doesn't have to be displayed. Okay.
Dilip, I have a question.
Yes.
Can XML be used as look and feel like HTML?
You have to run through some sort of a parser to change that to a different look and feel. So think about it, XML is only a data.
So no display?
If you want to display as is, like it's, for example, right now it's displayed as is, right? If that's how you want to display, that's okay. Think of this way. It contains only the information. It doesn't have, it's not associated with how the information needs to be displayed.
Right.
Okay, versus HTML tells you how the information will be displayed.
So if I want to display the same information like the XML, whatever I have, so what I have to do then?
Don't confuse the display with the data elements. Okay. Think of, in your mind, anything that you need to display in a browser equals to HTML. Okay.
Right.
Anything you need to use it to exchange the data is XML. Do not intermix the display and the exchanging of information. All similarity between that is that both are markup languages. Both are meant by computer to read it and parse it. But you will need to use both when you go do a testing. One is when you're testing web application, other one is when you're testing the backend services.
So you mean, you mean to say that for the front end, we will be using the HTML, and for the back end, we'll be using the XML?
Okay, do not mix the two things, right? Because when you say certain thing is a backend, the backend could be database, could be XML, could be services or anything. So that's why I don't want to tie that, because it'll create more confusion down the road for you. And in front end, it's not always HTML, right? So think of like it's those two terms as a separate. All I would just say is that HTML is equal to your presentation. And their presentation could be in a web, presentation could be in a browser, presentation could be in any other form. Okay. Think of it that both are markup language. That is the only commonality. One markup is used by browser to interpret and do a presentation. In XML, the markup language is used to interpret the data and says what value means what. Okay, I would not even equate it one to front end, one to the back end, because you could still do a whole bunch of things with the XML as well as with HTML.
So we can still pass data through HTML.
Very poor way to do it, but you can. I would never do it as an architect or programmer. I would never use HTML to pass the data. And if your developer is doing it, probably he needs some architecture lessons.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so think of this way. This is where I would just come in. You will encounter HTML more often when you're doing a user acceptance testing, because at that point you will be directly in the application. Okay, that's the closest correlation I can tell you from HTML to testing. Okay. Now, if you go into the same site, W3 Schools, they also have an XML tutorials where you can learn XML. Okay. I'll tell you one thing. It'll be much more easier for you to learn the HTML than XML, because XML requires a lot of additional programming aspects, right? So when you look into the parser or when you look into the schema, some of those are kind of used by developers to do things. Where it'll be useful for you is just an introduction, how to use, what are the tree, what are the syntax, how the display element happens, all those things. Okay. So I would go with those basics for the XML and can get also in here. Any questions? Okay, here's a homework for you. Okay, since you guys still trying to like figure out what is XML versus what's HTML. As a homework, I want you guys to write an XML file. Okay, let me do this. Okay. So I want you to write an XML file to capture your travel history. Okay. What I wanted is site. Let's start with the city you visited. Sites you visited in that city. When did you visit the city? Was it personal or business travel? Okay. So this is so I want you to write an XML file. Okay. To capture at least 4 cities that you have traveled. And for every city, you need to provide this 5 pieces of information. Okay. So let me be very. Okay, so you need to provide name of the city, the site. There may be more than one site, right? So there will be the date when you visited the city, right? The month and a year. Was it a business travel or it's a personal travel? And number of people traveled in your group. Okay. So write an XML file, run it, make sure it gets displayed like this properly. Okay. It has to display properly like this in a tree. And then send that. And we'll like you to get it done, Herschel, by the end of the day tomorrow.
What is it?
The XML file, the homework.
Yeah, definitely spend some time today. Yep.
Okay. Send it that.
I think it's a 5 to 10 minutes exercise. Okay?
Yeah, it's
If
not a
everything
big.
goes well, if you guys will be done in 10 minutes.
So any questions before I give you guys break for 5 minutes or 10 minutes? I know we are way overdue the break. If not, let's take a break till 11:10. I'll give you like an almost 30-minute break. So I know we can stretch it almost for 2 hours. So let's take a break. Go with that. And then we'll talk about the new topic after that. Okay. Oh, okay.